Ready. Step. Hot. 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 Hot.
Mrs. Reagan, as you saw, has come out of the limousine, in which she is going to watch the transfer of the casket onto the caisson. She will then ride the rest of the way up Constitution Avenue and up to the Capitol.
Still, I have a Jim. He's telling me
There she is. I got it. Hang on. Don't come to me. Don't come to me.
You might have heard a smattering of applause from Mrs. Reagan as she got out of the car, out of the limousine, and we're told by our correspondents at the scene that people are shouting, "We love you, Mrs. Reagan. We love you, Mrs. Reagan." You saw her signal and wave to members of the crowd.
Is this mic open or not?
Sir. That's it, right here. playing or outside?
Who is down at the point where this procession will make a bit of a turn before beginning to climb up what used to be called Jenkins Hill and is now called Capitol Hill. And at about that point, we're expecting that there will be a flyover visible to us as well. It will be interesting to see. Molly, let's set the scene as you can see it there now. Molly?
Hi, Britt. We have a military band going by now playing God Bless America, which was one of the late President Reagan's favorite patriotic songs. We can see the police cars, and beyond that, the caisson far in the distance. I would say it's still about 5 blocks from us. What's interesting here, and this is what my colleague Major Garrett has been talking about, is that there are so many people down here, and it is so quiet. People are just quietly taking pictures and looking down the street, awaiting the caisson as it moves down Constitution Avenue. Another part of the scene, Britt, is the buildings in Washington. Many of the tall buildings have patios sort of at the top, or have rooftop areas where you can come out and look out over Constitution. You should see it here as we stand street level. As we look up, there are tons of people on the roofs of buildings. We're in the shadow of the Canadian Embassy, and there are 2 levels of a balcony up at the top, and there are plenty of people up there looking down over Constitution Avenue, and you see that on all the tops of the buildings, people getting a bird's eye view of what's happening here. And as you were saying, Britt, as the caisson moves down Constitution Avenue, we're about at 5th and Constitution here. 1 more block toward the Capitol is 4th and Constitution, and as the caisson goes over 4th Street while still on Constitution, that's when we're expecting the 21 F-15s to fly over and do their military salute, their missing man formation, a bit of military honor and ceremony that will mark the late president's final 4 blocks as he heads toward the Capitol. Right now it's just very calm, very quiet on the street as the police cars with their lights flashing move down, and we believe the caisson and the horseless rider behind that. Everybody's holding people are standing about 5 or 6 people deep toward the fence, and so you see a lot of people at the back of the crowd holding their cameras into the air way above the crowd, trying to get pictures since they themselves may not be able to see over the heads of people. You have a lot of kids. The adults here have let a lot of the kids move up to the front, so they're along the front of the fences. There are a lot of kids taking pictures and taking in a moment of history. Britt?
Molly, thank you very much. As we await the arrival in the rotunda of the Capitol of the former president's casket, which is going to take just a few minutes as the military honor guard completes the rest of this task of bringing it upstairs, let us bring in the historian of the Senate, Richard Baker. Mr. Baker.
Let us pray. The poet T.S. Eliot wrote, "Neither does the actor suffer, nor the patient act, but both are fixed in an eternal patience, an eternal act. And the wheel turns. The wheel turns and is forever still." Ronald Wilson Reagan had many roles to play in life: husband, father, governor. But the most notable role on the world stage was that of the 40th President of the United States of America. With his style and grace, he made it seem easy. With his compassion and sense of timing, he brought strength of character to the nation and enkindled hope in a darkened world. As the patient, he brought humility to greatness and presided over embracing life to its natural end and dying with dignity, surrounded by love. To you, O Lord, ever patient with all of us, ever active in all of us, be praise and thanks for the life and impact Ronald Reagan has had upon us all. Support with your grace the Reagan family, and especially Mrs. Nancy Reagan, who stood by him in memorable moments of history and never left him in the long moments of difficult performance when the wheel turned all so slowly. Inspired by President Reagan, empower all of us, Lord, to employ our part in crumbling the walls of separation and in opening the gates to a globalized world. May our stillness here help us to remain faithful and patient with those suffering and to make decisions that will renew faith in the future. All-powerful God, fix America in your eternal patience, in your eternal act, as the wheel turns, now and forever. Amen.
Were these men, these ordinary men, doing extraordinary things? His answer was simple and direct. They were Americans. So I can think of no higher tribute or honor or title to confer upon Ronald Reagan than just to simply say he was an American. Godspeed, Mr. President. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Mrs. Reagan, members of the President's family, colleagues, distinguished guests, members of the diplomatic corps, fellow citizens. Knowing that this moment would come has not made it any easier to see the honor guard and the flag draped before us and to begin America's farewell to President Ronald Reagan. He said goodbye to us in a letter that showed his great courage and love for America. Yet for his friends and for his country, the parting comes only now. And in this national vigil of mourning, we show how much America loved this good man and how greatly we will miss him. A harsh winter morning in 1985 brought the inaugural ceremony inside to this rotunda. And standing in this place for the 50th presidential inauguration, Ronald Reagan spoke of a nation that was hopeful, big-hearted, idealistic, daring, decent, and fair. That was how he saw America, and that is how America came to know him. There was a kindness, simplicity, and goodness of character that marked all the years of his life. When you mourn a man of 93, no one is left who remembers him as a child in his mother's arms. Ronald Wilson Reagan's life began in a time and place so different from our own, in a quiet town on the prairie on the 6th of February, 1911. Nell and Jack Reagan would live long enough to see the kind of man they had raised, but they could never know all that destiny had in store for the boy they called Dutch. And if they could witness this scene in 2004, their son taken to his rest with the full honors of the United States, they would be so proud of all he had done with the life they gave him and the things they taught him. President Reagan once said, "I learned from my father the value of hard work and ambition and maybe a little something about telling a story." That was the Ronald Reagan who confidently set out on his own from Dixon, Illinois during the Great Depression, the man who would one day speak before cameras and crowds with such ease and self-command. From my mother, said President Reagan, I learned the value of prayer. My mother told me that everything in life happened for a purpose. She said all things were part of God's plan, even the most disheartening setbacks, and in the end, everything worked out for the best. This was the Ronald Reagan who had faith not just in his own gifts and his own future, but in the possibilities of every life. The cheerful spirit that carried him forward was more than a disposition. It was the optimism of a faithful soul who trusted in God's purposes and knew those purposes to be right and true. He once said, "There's no question I am an idealist," which is another way of saying, I am an American. We usually associate that quality with youth, and yet one of the most idealistic men ever to become president was also the oldest. He excelled in professions that have left many others jaded and self-satisfied, and yet somehow remained untouched by the worst influences of fame or power. If Ronald Reagan ever uttered a cynical or cruel or selfish word, the moment went unrecorded. Those who knew him in his youth and those who knew him a lifetime later all remember his largeness of spirit, his gentle instincts, and a quiet rectitude that drew others to him. Seen now at a distance, his strengths as a man and as a leader are only more impressive. It's the nature of the city of Washington that men and women arrive, leave their mark, and go their way. Some figures who seemed quite large and important in their day are sometimes forgotten or remembered with ambivalence. Yet nearly a generation after the often impassioned debates of the Reagan years, what lingers from that time is almost all good. And this is because of the calm and kind man who stood at the center of events. We think back with appreciation for the decency of our 40th president, and respect for all that he achieved. After so much turmoil in the 60s and 70s, our nation had begun to lose confidence, and some were heard to say that the presidency might even be too big for one man. That phrase did not survive the 1980s. For decades, America had waged a Cold War, and few believed it could possibly end in our own lifetimes. The president was one of those few, and it was the vision and the will of Ronald Reagan that gave hope to the oppressed, shamed the oppressors, and ended an evil empire. More than any other influence, the Cold War was ended by the perseverance and courage of one man who answered falsehood with truth and overcame evil with good. Ronald Reagan was more than an historic figure. He was a providential man who came along just when our nation and the world most needed him. And believing as he did that there is a plan at work in each life, he accepted not only the great duties that came to him, but also the great trials that came near the end. When he learned of his illness, his first thoughts were of Nancy. And who else but Ronald Reagan could face his own decline and death with a final message of hope to his country, telling us that for America, there is always a bright dawn ahead. Fellow Americans, here lies a graceful and a gallant man. Nancy, none of us can take away the sadness you are feeling. I hope it is a comfort to know how much he means to us and how much you mean to us as well. We honor your grace, your own courage, and above all, the great love that you gave to your husband. When these days of ceremony are completed, the nation returns him to you for the final journey to the West. And when he is laid to rest under the Pacific sky, we will be thinking of you as we commend to the Almighty the soul of his faithful servant, Ronald Wilson Reagan.
us for the benediction. O giver of every good and perfect gift, accept our gratitude for the life of your servant, President Ronald Reagan, whose love for freedom summoned our nation to embrace our best hopes and not our worst fears. Thank you for his ability to plant seeds of confidence and not doubt, and to lift liberty's lamp until totalitarian towers tumbled. In the days to come, remind us of America's opportunity to remain a shining city on a hill. Continue to comfort those who mourn. In a special way, be near to Mrs. Nancy Reagan and the family. May the death of this beloved leader prompt us to see you more clearly, to love you more dearly, and to follow you more nearly day by day. Now fill us with your peace as we trust you, so that we may overflow with hope by the power of your Spirit. Amen.
remains of Ronald Wilson Reagan, 40th President of the American Republic. Their passage will continue for hours through the dark night and into tomorrow. All come so that, in the words of Catullus, that they may give the last gifts to the dead. The gifts they bring on this June evening are the gifts of respect and of fond farewell to a fellow citizen whom they esteemed greatly and whose time among them now approaches its close. Now, just ahead for most of you, a special edition of 60 Minutes 2. And for those of you in the West, our coverage will continue. Dan Rather reporting from Washington.
Outside the rotunda, he's with the people out there. Anderson, what's happening?
Wolf, as you said, thousands of people have lined up. The line has really grown in the last hour or so since the procession finished. It seemed like a lot of people who were there watching the caisson, the casket go by, they have now come to join the line. It is very somber, it is very peaceful, very respectful here. What is fascinating is how many young people there are on the line. People really of all ages, but an awful lot of young people. I want to introduce you to a couple. This is Brian Wayert. He's 32 years old. You flew all the way from Illinois just to be here this morning. Why?
To say goodbye. He was my president. And, you know, I started watching when I was 8 years old, when he won the election in '80. And from then on, he's been my president, he's been my leader.
It's fascinating because when he got into office, he was the oldest president to serve, 69 when he was first elected. You were 8 years old. What was it at 8 years old that so captured your interest, your affection?
He made me feel good to be an American. The way his optimism kind of rang through in everything he did and the way he was able to, he truly was the great communicator, and he spoke to me and he made me proud to be an American.
And as you go by the casket tonight, what's going to go through your mind?
I've been thinking about that all day. I thought about it as I watched the casket roll by this afternoon. I don't really know. You know, I've been to the Presidential Library. I'm from Rock Island, Illinois. I've been to the boyhood home. This is going to be my goodbye to my president.
It's going to be hard.
Very, very, very much so. Very much so.
Brian, thank you very much.
Thank you,
nice
Anderson.
to talk to you. Also, just want to introduce you to
the center of the Capitol Rotunda. So we watch and await the arrival of President Bush. This is his first chance to pay his personal respects to President Reagan following his death last Saturday from Alzheimer's disease and complications resulting therefrom. So we watch and wait as President Bush is about to arrive on Capitol Hill to pay his respects to the late President Reagan. The president is said to be waiting just outside the west door there before coming in, so it should not be too long before Mr. Bush enters the rotunda to pay his personal respects. The decision has apparently been made that the people who were already in there waiting to take their turn will not be moved. Earlier, dignitaries had come in and they had kept the place clear of the general public while they filed through. That will apparently not be the case when President Bush comes in. And as you can see, it has not been. There are quite a number of people who are gathered there who are part of a long, long line of Americans and others who have been outside waiting through a couple of quite warm days here to be a part of the history of this moment. And so quite a remarkable moment for a number of tourists, or mourners, I should say, who had come into the Capitol hoping to pay their respects, as they will now be able to do, to the late president, only to be held there as President and Mrs. Bush came in. You saw the two of them come up to the casket, bow their heads in prayer, and then, of course, you saw the president reach over and, as others have done as well, smooth the flag with which that casket is draped. Then the two turned and left. We will have more special report in just a moment. Please stay tuned.
Tens of thousands filing past the flag-draped casket of former President Ronald Reagan as we look live at the Rotunda. That's where it's resting and has been. His body will lie in state until tomorrow morning. President Bush back from that G8 summit in Georgia and paying his respects to the nation's 40th president just less than an hour ago. Brian Wilson with a Fox Report Live on the top story at the bottom of the hour from D.C. Brian?
Shep, exactly right. The president, just back from the G8, stopped by the Capitol Rotunda about an hour ago to pay his respects to Ronald Reagan. He paused at the casket with his wife, Laura Bush, by his side, paused a moment of silent prayer. He touched the casket, then walked away. Of course, the president will eulogize Ronald Reagan tomorrow at the National Cathedral. Throughout the day, a number of dignitaries have stopped by the Capitol Rotunda. Mikhail Gorbachev, the former Secretary General of the old Soviet Union. Former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was one of Reagan's staunchest allies. She stopped by, along with a host of others. Inside the rotunda, it is quiet, somber, the crowd very muted. But outside, throughout the day, this crowd has taken on kind of the atmosphere of an old Irish wake. I think something Ronald Reagan would have liked. They are celebrating the life and accomplishments of Ronald Reagan. It takes about 5 hours from the time that you get into the line across the street, Shepard. But in the last few minutes, something has remarkably happened here. As the temperature started to drop, people have started coming by the thousands. I'm going to step out of the way, Shepard, as I sign off here and let you see the crowd now stretches across the street. It goes around the corner. It goes for a block all the way back to the Air and Space Museum. Thousands and thousands of Americans coming to pay their last respects to the 40th President of the United States. Shepard?
Brian, after the national funeral tomorrow, President Reagan's body will make one final trip from Washington back to his presidential library in California. There in a private